On October 7th, 1571, the sea between Greece and Italy caught fire. Not from storms, not from volcanoes, from war. Two civilizations, each claiming divine destiny, met on a single stretch of water to decide the future of the Mediterranean. On one side, the Ottoman Empire, the greatest naval power on earth. On the other, a desperate alliance of Christian kingdoms called the Holy League, an army of nations that rarely agreed on anything except one truth. If Lepanto fell, Europe would follow. This was not a battle for territory, not a battle for glory. This was a battle to prevent one faith from drowning the other. When the oars struck the water and the cannons roared, the world held its breath, because for the first time in centuries, the cross and the crescent met head-on, with no room to retreat. This is the story of Lepanto, the day the sea decided whose god would sail it. Before the battle began, the outcome seemed decided, because the Ottomans did not expect a battle. They expected obedience. By the mid-1500s, the Ottoman Empire was not just a superpower. It was destiny made political. Their armies owned the Balkans. Their fleets controlled the Aegean. Their banners rose over North Africa. Their corsairs ruled the Mediterranean like wolves that had inherited the sea. Wherever Ottoman sails appeared, cities surrendered before cannons fired. Why resist an empire that never lost? And at the heart of that empire stood one man, Sultan Selim II, son of Suleiman the Magnificent, inheritor of the strongest navy the Islamic world had ever commanded. Selim believed the Mediterranean belonged to him. Lepanto would prove how much that belief mattered. Europe did not unite. It never did, not fully. But in 1571, fear accomplished what diplomacy could not. The Pope, the Spanish monarchy, Venice, Genoa, Savoy, the Knights of Malta, all rivals, all suspicious of each other, agreed to form a single fleet, the Holy League. Not because they trusted one another, but because they feared the same horizon. If the Ottomans broke through, the Mediterranean would become an Ottoman lake, and the next step would be Europe itself. The Holy League wasn't a brotherhood. It was a survival pact. At the head of the Holy League stood a young commander, barely 24 years old, Don Juan of Austria. Charismatic, brilliant, unproven, a man whose courage forced older, more cautious leaders to follow his pace. On the Ottoman side, the fleet was commanded by Muezzin-Zadeh Ali Pasha, a seasoned leader, disciplined, unyielding, raised in a system that rewarded strength without hesitation. Don Juan fought with fire. Ali Pasha fought with inevitability. Their collision would reshape empires. The Ottoman fleet was larger, faster, more experienced, led by captains who had raided the Mediterranean for decades. The Holy League was divided, inexperienced as a unified force, and plagued by disputes over command, speed, and strategy. In every category except one, the Ottomans held the advantage. That one missing piece was unity. And unity was something the Holy League found only in desperation. On the morning of October 7th, the Gulf of Patras was quiet. Too quiet. The wind dropped to almost nothing. The water grew still like a mirror waiting to reflect a tragedy. Historians still argue whether that calm favored the Holy League or the Ottomans. The truth is simpler. It favored the side that wanted the fight more. And on that day, it was not the empire. Before the fleets met, Don Juan ordered a banner raised over his flagship, a massive image of Christ crucified. Beneath it, he issued his final command: let none turn back. not a command, a prophecy. The Holy League would either win together or drown together. It was not strategy. It was resolve. The one thing the Ottomans did not expect Europe to ever rediscover. When the two fleets finally came into view of each other, the sailors of both sides felt the same thing. This was not a raid. This was not a skirmish. This was judgment. Thousands of oars struck water. Hundreds of cannons rolled into position. Drums thundered. Trumpets screamed. Flags snapped in the rising wind. The sea, so calm an hour before, now churned with an ancient certainty. Two worlds were about to collide, and only one would leave the water alive. Naval battles do not begin with the first cannon. They begin with the first fear. As the sun rose, the two fleets spread across the Gulf of Patras, like two halves of a broken world. On the east, the Ottoman crescent, dark sails, red banners, war drums echoing across the still water. On the west, the cross of the Holy League, white sails marked with symbols of nations that had never fought together. Until today. From afar, the fleets looked calm. Up close, you could see hands shaking as sailors tightened oar ropes and kissed crucifixes or whispered Quranic prayers. Lepanto was not a battle of nations. It was a battle of destinies. The fleets arranged themselves in three wings. Holy League, left wing, Venetians under Agostino Barbarigo. Center, Don Juan's flagship, Real. Right wing, Giovanni Andrea Doria, Genoese admiral. Reserve, Alvaro de Bazan, the silent genius of the fleet, Ottomans. Left wing, Uluc Ali, the Algerian corsair. Center, Muezzinzadeh Ali Pasha. Right wing, Mehmed Sirocco, the speedmaster of the Aegean. Both sides positioned themselves to force a single, irresistible collision. But not all collisions are equal. Some create victory, some create disaster. Lepanto would have both. At dawn, the wind favored the Ottomans. Their lighter galleys accelerated first, closing distance rapidly. But then, in a moment, sailors still whisper about. The wind shifted west. The Holy League caught it. Their sails filled. Their formation stabilized. For the first time in the battle, the Ottomans lost control of the speed. The sea had chosen a side, not decisively, not permanently, but long enough to crack Ottoman certainty. Cannon fire broke the silence. Holy League galleasses, massive floating fortresses, unleashed broadsides never before seen in Mediterranean warfare. The Ottoman front ranks buckled. Ships splintered. Oars snapped. Men screamed as debris shredded the water. Ottoman commanders had never faced artillery like this. The galleasses created a killing field the Ottomans had no map for. But the empire was not built on hesitation. They pushed forward anyway. On the southern flank, Mehmed Sirocco's fast galleys crashed into the Venetian left wing with terrifying speed. Ramming, boarding, hand-to-hand combat exploding instantly. Venice fought like a cornered lion, outnumbered, outpaced, battered by Ottoman speed. Barbarigo ordered his men to close the gaps, to maintain the line. But a Venetian arrow, fired by accident from his own men, hit him in the eye. As he fell dying, his last order was simple: stand firm. And they did. The central lines crashed together like two continents colliding. Don Juan's flagship Real rammed Ali Pasha's Sultana. The shock felt like an earthquake. Ottoman janissaries stormed the deck. Spanish tercios countercharged. Arrows fell like rain. Hand cannons thundered. Steel clashed against steel as men fought not for ground, but for the soul of the sea. Ali Pasha raised his banner high. Don Juan raised his sword higher. The two commanders were now close enough to see each other's eyes. Lepanto was no longer a naval battle. It had become a duel between two worlds. On the northern flank, Giovanni Andrea Doria faced Uluc Ali, the most feared corsair in the Mediterranean. Uluc Ali did not attack the line. He attacked the weakness, the gap between Doria's wing and Don Juan's center. It was a trap, and Doria fell for it. He moved north to protect his flank, and in doing so opened a hole big enough for Uluc Ali to punch through. Dozens of Ottoman galleys rushed into the breach, racing toward the Christian center. For a moment, the Holy League trembled. Lepanto almost ended before it began. Seeing the breach, Don Juan knew what was coming. If Uluc Ali reached his rear, the Holy League center would collapse, and the cross would drown beneath the crescent. So he ordered every reserve he had to row into the gap. Álvaro de Bazan obeyed instantly. His reinforcements slammed into the Ottoman flank with perfect timing. For the first time in the battle, the tide turned not by wind, not by luck, but by command. And the Holy League refused to break. Every great battle has a moment when victory dies or is born. At the center of the battlefield, the two command ships, Don Juan's Real and Ali Pasha's Sultana, were locked together like two beasts refusing to let go. Ottoman janissaries fought with terrifying precision. Spanish tercios held their ground inch by inch. Arrows rained. Cannons fired point blank. Men fell, rose, fell again. The deck turned red before it turned silent. On both ships, survivors fought on bodies of the dead. No one yielded, because yielding meant the sea would swallow their world. On the southern flank, the Venetians were still locked in brutal combat against Mehmed Sirocco. Sirocco fought like a man possessed, determined to collapse the left wing before the Holy League could recover. But in the chaos, his flagship ran aground on shallow reefs. The Venetians seized the moment. They boarded, stormed, overwhelmed his guards. Sirocco refused to surrender. He fought until he was cut down on the deck of his own galley. His death freed the Venetian left wing, and the first crack appeared in the Ottoman crescent. Back in the center, Ali Pasha's janissaries made a final push onto the Real. For a moment, the banner of the Holy League was nearly torn down. If that banner fell, the center would collapse. The fleet would panic. Lepanto would end. Don Juan himself charged into the melee to push them back. Then, amid the chaos, a Spanish arquebusier took aim at Ali Pasha. One shot, one spark, one shattering moment. The bullet hit him above the eye. Ali Pasha fell, and with him, the heart of the Ottoman center. His men, seeing their commander dead, hesitated for the first time. Hesitation is the beginning of defeat. To signal the turning of the battle, Don Juan ordered something symbolic, something psychological, something devastating. Ali Pasha's severed head, wrapped in cloth, was lifted above the mast of the Real. The moment the Ottomans saw it, the Sultana's banner was torn down. The center, the pride of the Ottoman fleet, broke. Not gradually, instantly, A chain reaction began from one galley to the next. The crescent bent, then cracked, then collapsed. No naval commander can prepare for a moment like that. But one man did not break. Uluc Ali, the Algerian corsair, the most feared admiral in the Mediterranean. He had sliced through Doria's wing earlier in the battle. Now, seeing the Ottoman center collapse, he attempted the impossible. Break the Christian center from behind while everyone else was in retreat. He nearly succeeded. Uluc Ali captured the flagship of the Knights of Malta, killing many of its defenders and raising the crescent flag over it. For a moment, the Holy League panicked. Could the Ottomans still win? Don Juan had held one formation back. The reserve fleet under Álvaro de Bazan, a commander calm as a mountain and twice as immovable. Bazan moved his ships not with speed, but with precision. He cut off Uluc Ali's escape, surrounded him, and hammered the corsair's fleet with cannon fire from 3 directions. Uluc Ali realized the truth. The battle was lost. He signaled retreat and fled with a few ships fast enough to follow. The last flicker of Ottoman resistance left the battlefield. With Sirocco dead, Ali Pasha killed, Uluc Ali retreating, and dozens of Ottoman galleys burning. The entire formation shattered. Ships surrendered. Others sank. Many burned from end to end. The Mediterranean turned black with smoke and red with blood. Never before had the Ottoman Empire lost a naval battle of this magnitude. Lepanto was not a defeat. It was a shock, a contradiction, a rupture, a moment the empire was not built to understand. As the sun began to set, thousands of chained Christian galley slaves, men who had rowed for years beneath Ottoman whips, were freed from the Ottoman ships that the Holy League captured. Many wept. Many fell to their knees. Some kissed the wooden decks of the ships that rescued them. For Don Juan and the Holy League, this was more than victory. It was vindication. A message to Europe. The Mediterranean is not lost yet. Lepanto had not decided everything, but it had decided something crucial. The Ottoman advance was not unstoppable, and the Cross still knew how to fight. Victories are never free. They are only paid for by the living, after the battle is over. When the fighting finally stopped, the Gulf of Patras looked less like water and more like a grave. Wreckage drifted across the surface. Broken oars, splintered masts, shattered shields, floating corpses still wearing the colors of 2 civilizations. The sea could not hold them all. Some sank. Some washed ashore. Some remained suspended between sky and water, silent witnesses to the cost of survival. Lepanto was a victory, but it was a victory drenched in absence. The Holy League had won, but the price was staggering. Thousands of soldiers drowned, burned, bled out on the decks, or disappeared beneath collapsing masts. Venice lost some of its finest captains. Spain lost hundreds of elite tercios. Genoa's ships were shattered. The Knights of Malta were nearly wiped out holding their line. Even Don Juan stood on a deck slick with blood. His own men, his own friends, the young volunteers who had followed him, believing in a destiny they would not see. Victory does not erase grief. It only gives it a shape. The Ottoman defeat was unlike anything the empire had experienced in a century. Hundreds of ships lost, thousands of trained sailors dead, elite janissaries wiped out, veteran corsairs captured or killed. But the wound that struck deepest was not physical. It was psychological. For the first time in living memory, the Ottoman navy, the terror of the Mediterranean, had been defeated in open battle. Not by storms, not by misfortune, not by attrition. Defeated by an alliance of Christian kingdoms the empire considered inferior, Lepanto tore open a truth the Ottomans had forgotten: no empire is invincible. When the battle ended, the surviving galleys of the Holy League began pulling chained men from the lower decks of captured Ottoman ships. Tens of thousands of Christian galley slaves, men kidnapped from villages, merchants captured at sea, soldiers taken in earlier wars, emerged into daylight for the first time in years. Some collapsed immediately. Some cried uncontrollably. Some stared in disbelief at the open sky as if it were something mythical. They had rode the empire to war. Now they witnessed the empire's greatest defeat. Their freedom became the most human victory Lepanto produced. Don Juan of Austria did not celebrate the victory. He walked the decks of the captured ships in silence, stepping between bodies, listening to the groans of survivors. He had won a war many believed unwinnable, but his eyes carried the weight of every man who died for it. On the other side, Uluc Ali, the only Ottoman commander to escape with honor, returned to Istanbul with a handful of ships. When the Sultan asked him how the empire could have lost, Uluc Ali answered with a sentence that became legend: "We were not defeated. We were overwhelmed." A polite way to say the impossible had happened. Lepanto is often remembered as a glorious Christian victory. But the sea remembers something different. The screams, the splintering of wood, the smell of burning pitch, the prayers shouted over cannon fire, the bodies that would never go home. The sea does not record glory. It records cost. And Lepanto's cost was almost too great to comprehend. Despite the scale of the Holy League's triumph, the truth is sobering. Lepanto did not destroy the Ottoman Empire. It did not reclaim the Holy Land. It did not end the struggle between the Cross and the Crescent. The Ottomans rebuilt their fleet within a single year. They remained a superpower for centuries after. Lepanto changed history, but it did not rewrite destiny. Its true victory was not territorial. It was psychological. It proved that the Ottoman advance could be stopped. It proved that Europe could still unite. And it proved that faith, even divided faith, could find strength when the sea demanded it. As night fell over the Gulf of Patras, the fires dimmed, the screams faded, and the broken ships drifted quietly. Survivors rowed toward safe harbor. Commanders whispered prayers. Chaplains blessed the dead. Sailors wrapped bodies in cloth and lowered them into the water. The battle had ended. The war had not. But something deeper had shifted. Something no empire or navy could undo. Lepanto had become a mirror that asked both empires, both religions, both civilizations, what happens when destiny meets resistance? And the answer would echo for centuries. Some victories change borders. Lepanto changed imaginations. For over a century, the Ottoman Empire had seemed invincible. They had taken Constantinople, crushed Balkan kingdoms, swept across the Mediterranean like a tide without a moon. Until Lepanto. Lepanto did not destroy the empire. but it destroyed something just as powerful: the illusion of inevitability. Europe saw the impossible happen. The Ottoman elite, janissaries, corsairs, admirals, brought to a halt by a navy that barely trusted itself before the battle began. After Lepanto, fear changed sides. The Holy League was not built on trust. Spain distrusted Venice. Venice despised Genoa. The papacy doubted all of them. But for one fleeting moment, they put aside rivalries that had shaped generations. And that was Lepanto's real miracle. Not cannons, not sails, not wind. Unity. A kind of unity Europe rarely knew and almost never kept. Lepanto showed what Europe could be, not what it would be. And that difference shaped every century that followed. Across Europe, the victory was treated not as military success, but divine intervention. Church bells rang in cities that didn't even know where Lepanto was. Poets glorified Don Juan as a savior of civilization. Painters immortalized the moment as if angels themselves had tilted the battle. For Christian Europe, Lepanto became legend, a reminder that God still answered prayers. For the Ottoman Empire, it became a forbidden memory. The defeat no one discussed, but everyone felt. History remembers facts. Civilizations remember symbols. Lepanto became a symbol. Despite the celebration, the limits of Lepanto were clear. The Holy League fractured almost immediately after the battle. Venice signed peace with the Ottomans within a year. Spain refocused on its Atlantic empire. The papacy lost leverage as national interests re-emerged. And the Ottomans, with resources vast and disciplined, rebuilt their fleet faster than Europe believed possible. Lepanto did not end Ottoman power. It did not secure Christian dominance of the sea. It did not prevent future wars between Cross and Crescent. Lepanto changed the story, not the outcome. The sailors, soldiers, and slaves who fought at Lepanto would not live to see how history told their story. They would not witness the rise of new empires, the fall of old ones, the wars and revolutions that reshaped the world. To the men on those burning ships, Lepanto was not destiny. It was survival, desperation, a moment carved into time by sweat, fire, and blood. History later called it the battle that saved Europe. But to those who fought, it was simply the day they refused to die quietly. If you walk the shores near Lepanto today, the sea is calm. No banners, no cannons, no screams, only waves erasing the memory of violence they once held. Neither side emerged truly victorious. The Holy League won the battle but lost its unity. The Ottomans lost ships but kept their empire. Lepanto's real victor was neither Cross nor Crescent. It was the world after the battle, the world shaped by the realization that even the strongest empire could bleed, and that even the most divided alliances could stand together when history demanded it. As the last bodies were buried at sea and surviving ships limped toward ports that would celebrate them like heroes, one question remained. If this battle decided nothing, why does it matter so much? Why do historians call it a turning point? Why do civilizations trace their identity back to a single day of fire and smoke on an empty stretch of water? The answer does not belong to empires. It belongs to belief. The belief that the world could still change, that destiny was not fixed. That even when the odds are impossible, the outcome is not. Lepanto mattered because it proved that fate could be fought, even on the sea. Empires forget battles, but the sea never forgets. In the months after Lepanto, Europe celebrated as if the Ottoman Empire had collapsed overnight. But it didn't. Within a year, the Sultan rebuilt an entire navy. New galleys, new captains, new confidence. The Ottoman Empire would continue dominating the region for centuries. Lepanto did not end the empire, but it ended something deeper. The illusion that the empire could not be challenged. Fear had changed direction. For Christian Europe, Lepanto became more than a victory. It became a reassurance that faith, even fractured and doubtful, could still rise against overwhelming force. The Holy League didn't win because they were stronger. They won because they refused to accept that the sea or destiny already belonged to someone else. Faith did not conquer the water, but it survived it. And sometimes, survival is the greatest form of triumph. If the sea could speak, it would not describe Lepanto as a holy victory or a heroic stand. It would speak of fire floating on waves, of oars turning red, of men praying to the same God in different languages as they drowned beside each other. It would remember the silence after the cannon stopped, the bodies drifting, the flags sinking, the sunlight touching faces that would never rise again. The sea does not take sides. It only takes men. Don Juan, Ali Pasha, Sirocco, Uluc Ali. None lived to see what Lepanto became. They fought for victory. History turned it into a symbol large enough to outgrow all of them. Because in the centuries that followed, Lepanto was used to justify wars it never caused, to inspire nations it never knew, and to remind rulers that no empire, no matter how vast, is beyond the reach of a single day. Lepanto belongs to the people who survived it, but the meaning of Lepanto belongs to everyone else. History remembers Lepanto as the battle that saved Europe, but the truth is more complicated. Lepanto did not save a continent. It did not end a war. It did not even break an empire. What Lepanto saved was a belief that the world can change even when it seems already decided. Because on that quiet morning in 1571, every calculation said the Holy League would lose. They were outnumbered, outsailed, outgunned, divided by politics, resentment, and centuries of distrust. But when the moment came, they rode forward anyway. Not because they knew they would win, but because turning back meant surrendering not just the sea, but the future. And that is why Lepanto still matters. Not for the ships that sank, not for the banners that burned, not even for the victory itself. Lepanto matters because it shows something rare. That courage can interrupt destiny. Empires rise and fall. Seas swallow everything. But the choice to fight, even when defeat seems certain, is the one thing history never forgets. The Ottomans rebuilt their navy. Europe fractured again. The world continued changing. But the memory of Lepanto remained. A day when faith refused to drown, when unity lasted long enough to matter, and when a sea of fire proved that even the strongest empire could bleed. This was not just a battle. This was the moment when the cross did not conquer the crescent, but refused to be erased by it. And sometimes, that is victory enough.